Hello, good evening to everyone. Welcome to an Isaka Square Table. I'm going to be your host. Isaka Square Tables are organized and hosted by Isaka Netherlands chapter and sponsored by Nuria, the IT Auditors Institute of the Netherlands. We would like to welcome you. My name is Ramzi Masri. I'm going to be the host for today. Today we have a Square Table with the title of Complex AI Regulations Across Major Global Powers. Before we go there, we need to share some house rules. Basically, please mute your microphone and stop sharing your video camera as soon as you enter the session and during the whole session. Otherwise, we will have to forcefully remove you from the meeting. Make sure you appear on the Microsoft Teams with the same first name, last name used for registration to acquire the CPEs. According to the ISACA policy, we have to have you at least for 50 minutes to provide one CPE, which is the CPE that's going to be provided tonight. So please stay with us till the end of the session. This presentation is indeed being recorded, and that is why we would love to ask you to make sure you are at all times muted and your camera is turned off. I can see one attendee having the camera on, so please turn off the camera even if it's blacked. For tonight's, let's say, the Square Table, we have a request. All the questions will be moderated through the chat. If possible, use the hashtag question before you're asking the question to know that you are not giving a remark to everyone attending, but you want to actually ask that question to our speaker. As your moderator and host, I will take it on my responsibility to find the best time to pose our speaker and ask that question on your behalf. Of course, if a discussion is needed, maybe at the end we can ask you to mute and by raising your hand and discussing, but that's at the very far end of the presentation. We have a couple of announcements from ISACA Global and also from ISACA Netherlands. But before I proceed, if possible, anyone with the camera on, please turn it off. Otherwise, we will have to take you off the meeting if you don't mind. The announcements from ISACA Global is related to tonight's Square Table. We are talking about the AI. ISACA is announcing next week, and maybe this is the world premiere, in Phoenix, 8th to 10th of May, there is the ISACA North America Conference, and they will announce 3 new courses related to AI, AI Essentials, Auditing Generative AI, and AI Governance. And in June, we will be and also ISACA Global is announcing 3 new courses. One is the Ethical Perspectives in AI, one is Introduction to AI for Auditors, and Machine Learning. You can see on the screen the information related to AI and the resources, because already ISACA provided some white papers on how to audit the AI models. You can find it on www.isaca.org/resources/artificial-intelligence. I would highly recommend to focus on that resource level, because there is a lot of guidance coming into from ISACA to the members free of charge on that URL. The other thing that we have is 2 things. The CISA exam material is now changed. 1st of May, so today it will you can get actually the new outline and the changes, and you can get the new material, and the new exam will start 1st of August. So if anyone either is interested to take the exam or is going to renew, maybe this is an important information. Last but not least, your ISACA membership card, that nice, let's say, cardboard card, is now digital. You can have it on your mobile, on the wallet. That's all from ISACA Global. From our side, we want to tell you about our upcoming Square Tables. So we do have another AI-related one, which is Data Quality in the AI Era, Innovations, Impacts, and Insights. That's 15th of May. 22nd of May, we are going through cybersecurity, so Zero Trust as a Service. 12th June, SIEM versus SOAR. And we do have 3 upcoming roundtables, 2 in Eindhoven. One is also 15th of May. How does IAM and IS2 compliancy help? That presentation is in English. 5th of June, we have an Eindhoven DORA, Hacker Needs Tellen. This presentation is actually in Dutch. And 10th of June, we have an Utrecht usage of blockchain. those are all very interesting events that I would recommend. Start from now the registration, just not to forget. We also have our special event. It's almost sold out. 23rd of May in Brooklyn, Cyberbook 2024, where we are hosting a group of Dutch book writers and their books, and we're going to go through a review of these books, and actually there might be a small expo. This event is one of the fruits of the collaboration between four chapters: ISACA Netherlands chapter, OWASP Netherlands chapter, IC Square Netherlands, and Secure Software Alliance. And we are very proud to be reaching out to our Dutch fellow chapters, even other organizations, to develop and deliver a very good event for you. Last but not least, we wanted to remind you of our risk event. It's coming back. It's, I think, the 5th anniversary, if I'm not mistaken. The risk event 24 information will be coming very soon, 6th of November 2024, in your favorite spot, SPANT, the Congress Center in Bussum. So please mark your calendars. We were able to do it November 16th twice, but this year it's 6th November. So please mark the calendar, your calendars, and hopefully we see you in person on the risk event. Without further ado, I would like to introduce our speaker tonight, Jean-Hugues Mignon. I'm sorry, Jean, that my French is not good, so you will have to pronounce it the right way for the audience. He's the co-founder and CTO of Anov International, a data protection lawyer and former DPO, registered at the Autoriteit Persoonsgegevens in the Netherlands, former information security and data privacy officer for the NN Group NV and Onto IT Cybersecurity. He's a privacy specialist at the European Space Agency, also certified CIPP/Europe and CIPM from International Association of Privacy Professionals, and leading the development team of Anov Technology, a next generation digital assurance tool. So, yeah, go ahead. Please take on the screen sharing and
yes.
Go ahead. Thank you.
Okay, perfect. Well, you pronounce my name very well, so congrats on that.
Thank you.
So that's good. I'm just gonna slightly move up the Teams pop-up so I can also see a bit the slides. Well, good evening, everyone. As Ramzi said, my name is Jean-Hugues Mignon. I'm French, living in the Netherlands for the past 6 years. I'm also a CTO, but I'm a privacy lawyer at first. I graduated on GDPR and then moved towards, let's say, IT and security more and more in the past 6 years. And without further ado, what I wanted to do is share with you tonight, let's say, the developments in the legislation regarding artificial intelligence. The idea is not really... Sorry?
Can I stop you and ask, would you like us to put the poll right now to see how people are involved with AI?
Yeah, that can be. You can release the poll. I can just have a quick word, and then we can go on to the results of the poll. Of course, no problem.
Go ahead.
The idea is to share a bit about the legislation, the upcoming legislation in Europe, what has already been done in the US, and what's also going on in China. The idea is to give you a bit the let's say retrospective about the fact that there is not only one concept about artificial intelligence, but multiple approaches. So the idea is tonight to really not deep dive into one specific regulation, so not the EU AI Act, for example, but just really look at the big picture. While we are getting the results of the poll, by the way, Ramzi, I can't see the results. I can't see when the poll is done, so feel free to interrupt me when you have your results.
Yeah, we have 39 responses, so we need everyone to vote, please. We have 120 people. As much as possible, please go ahead and vote. But Jan, go ahead. No worries.
Yeah. So tonight, we will see three models, as I previously mentioned. First, we will see the European model, the European approach, which is, well, let's say, pioneering in data regulation, really focusing on privacy. We have what we called, and we'll see what we call an horizontal regulation, which means that we have specific regulations per domain that also target very specific markets. there is also a big need on the European approach to really re-establish a certain sovereignty, because most of the AI provider, but most of the tech provider are either located in the US or located in Asia, and with China leading the way. The idea is also to bring Europe a bit further in terms of independence on also the hardware manufacturing. So that's why, for example, we have the European Chips Act. Not that it relates directly to AI or it impacts AI directly, but the hardware is necessary for the AI to work. So we are trying to bring back some of the production inside the European Union, and then the idea is also to in Europe, and that's what really changed with GDPR, is to also impose the standards, the European standards, onto also companies, international companies that want to have an activity in the European Union, and therefore imposing a certain model outside the border of the European Union. The second model that we will see is also the US one, which is more a laissez-faire approach, French expression for saying just, well, we let do, we see later which direction the market and the innovation will take. Here we have multi-layered regulations. We'll see a federal level, but also state level. And it's a bit more fuzzy than the European Union, where the European Union, all member states, let's say, implicitly agreed that European Commission and European Parliament are leading the regulatory perspective. In the US, it's a bit more blurry, and you'll see that we'll have to spend a bit more time on it. And then the last model that we'll see is the Chinese model, which is definitely one of the leader in artificial intelligence. And here you will see that it's a much more centralized approach to ensure, with a focus more on national security, also due to a different concept of privacy on the approach, a different approach to technology. And the idea is to also see what these models, although a bit further away than, for example, the American model, what it can bring also in terms of perspective, because we are not also so far from the Chinese perspective. How are we in terms of polls? Do we have all the results we want, Ramzi?
Sorry, I was on mute. Yeah, we do have 63 responses.
Okay, we can take 2 minutes more. I can pursue a bit more, and then we can look a bit further into the results.
Yeah, just I need to give a hint, because it seems if you don't open the chat, you don't see the poll. So please, everyone, open the chat, and then you will see the poll, and you can submit your vote. Thank you.
So, of course, before there. My presentation. There you go. So yeah, before we really dive into, I also wanted to give a couple of numbers. I always like to start my presentation with numbers, not that they really mean a lot to a lot of people, but what I like is the perspective and taking a step back. And here I wanted to focus more on the impact of artificial intelligence itself as the technology. So first, the amount of data that is being produced is enormous, and it's actually exponential. In 2018, we produced 33 zettabytes of data, whereas in 2025, we'll produce 175. I think, well, I learned doing this presentation what a zettabyte is. So a zettabyte is actually 1,000 billion gigabytes. So it's an enormous amount. It's basically 10 to the power 21 to the power of 10 bytes, which is, well, we are entering the sphere of numbers that I think the human brain cannot comprehend. When we talk about artificial intelligence, and by extension, actually automation of tasks, we can see that actually there's a range between 11 to 37% of increase in labor productivity. So simply the value that will be produced will increase between 11 to 37%. By the way, all these numbers, they come from a report from the OECD on the future of work that was published in 2021. It's a very interesting report to read on what will be the impact of artificial intelligence. And what's interesting is also to see how actually, although it has been published a bit less than 3 years ago, it is already quite outdated in terms of prediction of what will be the impact of artificial intelligence. And in terms of jobs, what will it bring also to the workforce? Because it's often argument that is being brought as, let's say, a fear for artificial intelligence. 14% of jobs will be replaced by AI. Purely and simply, we are talking about repetitive tasks, job based on repetitive tasks that will purely and simply be replaced, whereas 32% will face substantial change. And it's actually, well, not here, but 70% of jobs globally, existing jobs, will have an AI component into their daily activity. So that just gives a bit of perspective before we dive into the let's say, legislative part and the comparison between the models. Maybe we can look into the results of the polls, Ramzi?
Yes.
curious,
So
actually.
so yeah, we have around 74 responses. That's still we're missing some people, but the results are almost, I guess, more or less conclusive. So consumer of AI in a user fashion, so someone who's using Copilot or ChatGPT or likes, that's 48% almost. Developing with, I'm saying almost because there are some people who didn't vote yet. The votes are coming in, but slow. Developing with a ready-made AI model, that's around 21%. Developing an AI model from scratch, that's about 10%, which is really interesting. Other/no involvement for now. So I guess this encompasses people who didn't use AI completely, or also who don't fit the big categories that we had, and that's around almost 90%.
It's quite interesting to see that already half of the audience is already using AI. Or to be honest, I know that it's a big thing, but I don't know so many people, let's say, outside our sphere, let's say AI sphere, that actually use AI per se. For example, if I look at my siblings, they don't necessarily use AI in their daily jobs.
Yeah. No, but I would say what's also interesting for me is the fact that if we try to put them into buckets, we have 50% people who use and consume AI in user session, around 30% and more developing either with a model that's pre-existing or an actual model. We have 11% here, and then the rest with, they say, other no involvement. You cannot always say it's 100% no involvement, maybe not yet, but yeah, that's really great. We had a question, you answered it partially, which is like, can you tell what jobs are affected or maybe types of jobs? But you already said the types of jobs, and I'm going to search the URL for the report and put it in for people's reference.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, it's in the presentation notes, so you can find it there.
Excellent, thank you.
So, but yeah, in terms of jobs, so mainly the domains that are planned to be affected are, of course, manufacturers, so factories where we see automation, and I think the numbers are also a bit bumped up also by robotics, but because the report is both on robotics and artificial intelligence, it's on automation in general. There is a lot also about artificial intelligence into agriculture that will be involved. And that's for, let's say, more the jobs to be replaced, mainly in manufacture. And for the job impacted, it's a lot of office jobs, so administrative job, accounting, finance, human resources. All these jobs are actually heavily, substantially impacted by artificial intelligence. I hope this answers the question. If you have other questions, feel free to send them in the chat. So going into the legislation in Europe, we will focus on, of course, the main document that is, let's say, the approach that the European Union has taken, and it's the European Union Act for Artificial Intelligence, or the EU AI Act. And I think it's important that we just take some time to look at where do we stand today, because I often hear people say, "Oh, the AI Act is already into force. but I thought that it would never happen. Sometimes we hear that it has been voted at the European Parliament, but it's not effective, so it's not clear. So just as a timeline, basically what happened is that it has been proposed as a draft by the European Commission in 2021, April 2021. Then we had a period where multiple bodies from the European Union provided their opinions. It was especially because there was at least at the time, no clarity about who would be responsible for what. And there was a hint from the European Commission that they would rely on the existing agencies or institutions for being supervisory authorities in their domain, with artificial intelligence as one of the components of what they need to look at. So we had 3 opinions. The most important one, if you ever want to read a bit about it, is the one from the European Central Bank, where they really take a stand saying that they will not be the supervisory authority, and they strongly advised to go towards an artificial intelligence board and a dedicated authority, which is actually what we had in the version of January this year. So the European Parliament, so we had the European Commission that basically sent it for review to the different bodies. Then it is sent to the European Parliament, that is reviewing it and providing some amendments to the text. So they had about, if I'm not mistaken, 450 amendments, which is an enormous amount for a first review from the European Parliament. Then what happened is that they reviewed it. They had some discussion, because usually it's amended by a small group at the European Parliament, and then the entire assembly vote on it. It was approved in March 2024. So that's what we call the first reading. And then usually it is submitted to the Council of the EU. And the Council of the EU is basically all the ministers from each member state, so of the relevant topic. So let's say Ministry of Technology. If you have it can be also Ministry of Finance. Usually the member state decide which minister they want to send, or secretary they want to send to this Council of EU. And there they would need to approve as well and vote on the text. If they refuse, it goes back to the European Parliament for what we call the second reading. They resend it to the Council of the EU, and there it has to be approved, or we go into another review with the European Commission involved. So that's more or less how it works. So today, what do we do is that we wait for the Council of the EU to review the amendments and review the text and vote it. We expect that they will probably approve it by or before June. When I was preparing this presentation, because I used it a couple of times, we are still hoping now that it will happen in June 2024, for the reason that we have the European elections that are coming, and if it is not, then it will delay the adoption of the European AI Act. So that would be the case, and then we expect an entry into force into 2025, because then we need to finalize the text, make it reviewed by lawyers, and then it is published. And from the moment it will be published, let's say January 2025, it will be entering into force 20 days after, and then there will be probably, very, very likely, a grace period of 24 months, the same as for GDPR, in which there won't be any control, but it will already be into force. So that's where we stand with the European Union Act. The AI Act, I have gathered the whole text into 12 key facts to make sure that we can go through quickly, because it's quite a tedious text to read. Same for GDPR, some of you fancied reading it. So the first thing is that, and what makes it so specific, is that there is a very broad definition of what is an AI. It's basically a machine-based system designed to operate at different level of autonomy, and that can exhibit adaptiveness after deployment, have explicit and implicit objective from the input it receives, that can generate output as prediction, content, recommendations, etc. What's important is the fact that there is an accent put on the autonomy, so it has to be autonomous, but basically it's still quite broad. and it has to receive input. But that's basically just the two main characteristics of artificial intelligence. So even if you have, let's say, a certain algorithm, or for example, if you have some analytics, like for example, the indexing that was being done by some search engine, this would fall onto as an AI system as considered by the EU AI Act. The second most important thing is a list. There is a list of AI practices that are prohibited. So, well, you have a list that is in annex, but basically we have the use of subliminal techniques, so what we call dark patterns, exploiting vulnerabilities of people or certain specific groups that can lead to harming them. We think about, for example, a case from a couple of years ago about what was called the gaydar, which was basically just the possibility to find the trait or the sexuality of a person based on two pictures, I think it was, or maybe three pictures, and you could assume with a certain relatively high probability whether this person was gay, homosexual, or heterosexual. Biometric categorization of systems. There is some. So basically, use of biometrics in AI with, of course, certain exceptions. Real-time remote biometric identification. So also with some exceptions, but basically, well, real-time cameras, CCTV, and with the identification of individuals, and facial recognitions, and also inferring emotions into workplaces. So, for example, that can be prohibited. There is the definition of what is called high-risk AI systems that are basically falling. You are falling into the category of high risk if you are either in the list of the Annex A of the text, or Annex 3, sorry, or if you are in a certain domain, if you are an AI in a certain domain, civil aviation, vehicle security, marine equipment, toys, lifts, pressure equipments, so mainly for infrastructure. Then we have, of course, with the new AI Act, a lot of additional administration to do, especially for the IRIS system, where you have to perform impact assessments, reports, third-party audits from independent third parties, which you need to also publicly share with your consumers, but also with the supervisory authority. We have obligations throughout the value chain. So if your company, for example, uses an AI from an AI provider, then you have responsibilities also in the use of the AI, and your employees also have a responsibility in the use and respecting the conditions of use of the AI. And your company, although it's not a tool that is provided by you, will be held accountable for what is being produced with this artificial intelligence. We have also obligation for the users of AI, high-risk AI systems, so even more than what I just said. So they will be responsible for the content, the individual users. We have special measures for bank, insurance, and governments, where basically we have to provide what they call fundamental rights impact assessments. So it's like the DPIA for the GDPR, for those who are familiar with it. There is a big problem about a right to an explanation. So the EU AI Act, and that's one of the amendments from the European Parliament, is there is a right to an explanation. So the same as in GDPR, where you have the right to access your data and to be informed, there is a right to receive an explanation about how the AI has been trained, on what kind of data sets, what are the rules behind, and how your data is being used, which is putting a lot of stress on the AI providers, but also on the companies that may use AI services and who should be able to also provide this information. And there is this, of course, let's say, tediousness of the administration and keeping this information clear, which is not always an easy task, but also the problem with trade secrets. Say, for example, you use a large language model to train your own system. You would have, in theory, to share with users what you have done, which might come at some point with some problems with the protection of your trade secrets or your intellectual property, etc. We have a lower threshold for the data subject rights. So by this, we mean that basically you simply, let's say a normal user, a regular person, just need to use the AI once to basically ask for this information relating actually to number 8, which causes a lot of troubles. So these are still points that are unclear, but for now they will be posing a lot of administrative burden on companies. And then we have 3 more key facts that are, let's say, a bit more general. But we have a special category of what is called general purpose AI. So these are, let's say, like ChatGPT, for example, they are considered as general purpose, where they will have also their own kind of risk assessments, but the risk assessment will be different. The acceptation principle will be lower, and actually the responsibility will shift more towards the users themselves than actually the language provider. We have, of course, a layer of compliance that is more and more complex, because now there's a creation of an AI board, an AI office, plus the national authority are claiming also their own share of responsibilities. So it is also quite unclear how it will be, even more than with the GDPR. And then last but not least, I think that's what a lot of people also kept as a memory from GDPR, is the very high fine. So for a reminder, GDPR was 20 million or 2% of your annual turnover, whatever is the highest. So these were already enormous, especially when you're Google or Amazon. Now we are talking about 35 million and 7%, up to 7% of your turnover, whatever is the highest. So it's 3 times more than GDPR. Of course, it's it's a very specific case, but it is enormous, and that might also cause some issues. So, Ramzi,
can I stop you because we have 2 very relevant questions?
Yeah.
Yes, one is the facial recognition like China is doing in the prohibited practices? So this is related to number 2. It is. Okay. And the second one is a bit more complex. In accordance with the EU Act, software that uses, and between quotes, logic and knowledge-based approaches, end of quote, Annex 1 is AI, which includes the majority of software. How do you think proportionality will be determined? I think this is a very specific one, but it's a good one.
So can you repeat? Can you repeat the second one, please?
So it's about basically in Annex 1, it seems there is a logic and knowledge-based approaches. Yeah. And I say it seems because I didn't read everything in the AI Act. I read it quickly, to be honest. I skimmed through it.
I can step in if you want to.
Oh, yeah, go ahead. Yeah, I was going to say so, Daniela. Go ahead, please.
Jean-Luc, so in the Annex 1 of the draft of the AI Act, it does read that AI systems include software that uses logic and knowledge-based approaches, as well as statistical approaches. Yeah. So to me, this reads to this moment that any piece of software is actually AI. So how will we determine the proportionality of the application of the acts?
Yeah, so that's actually very, very relevant, a very good question indeed. So, well, that's actually one of the main problems of the broad definition of the AI Act, is the fact that actually there is almost no limit to what could be considered as artificial intelligence. How will it be? Will it be the proportionality? Well, I can only give my, let's say, a guess, my opinion. I think that we will first focus on the foundation models with the big providers such as OpenAI or Mistral or Google, and then we will flow down into probably the companies that are claiming to use artificial intelligence, because that's, I think, usually also how the supervisory authority are working, is that usually they look at when they receive a complaint, for example, for GDPR. I take GDPR as an analogy because it's the same kind of regulations. What they do is that when they receive a complaint, they take a look at the company itself. So how do they behave online? What are they putting forward? If they are putting, for example, privacy as an important element, or if they are just not taking care of it. And then they usually classify the different, rank the different complaint and the different companies, and that they, because they have limited resources, they will first focus on the ones that have at least a lot of complaints, or that will claim that they do certain kinds of data processing activity that would be considered as high risk, typically anything that involve health data or political data, etc. So I think the focus will, for now, as the situation is we keep this logic and knowledge-based approach, which basically virtually puts any piece of software, indeed, but I think there will be a proportionality done at the supervisory authority, because they will have limited resources and they will just flow down as they can. What could be is that there could be at the national level register where companies that use AI might self-declare themselves as AI companies, and therefore they would be also under the scope of supervision. There's more and more talks about that. Also in the US, I will probably have a word about that later. But the idea is indeed to maybe work on this, let's say, self-declaration approach. As for the first question, well, I answered very quickly, but yes. Yep. So
we have a third one, so I will have to cut you through, because the third one is more interesting. Is AI Act in line with MDR, Medical Device Regulation, and yes or no, and how they are connected?
Yes, so yeah, it is not directly in line, as they are quite different regulations, although AI Act, of course, has does not directly quote this regulation, but what happens is that the AI gives a specific place to health data, because the AI is basically AI Act, is constructed the same way as GDPR. It's really identical in terms of constructure, and if you also look at the history of how GDPR evolved throughout the parliament, etc., we have the same challenges. So that's why I take GDPR often as an analogy. But basically, there is a very central place given to the use of AI with health data, and that is part of what I was mentioning as high-risk AI systems that has its own set of rules, really dedicated to these rules.
Okay, excellent. I think we managed to answer all the questions, so maybe we can proceed with the presentation.
Yes. So what I will do, because mindful of the time, I will just go very quickly to this one. So we have two additional legislation, although not directly targeted at AI, but targeted at tech company that will also rely on AI. We have the Digital Market Act, that is a very important piece of regulation in Europe, and that is nowadays, when I talked about the horizontal legislation in Europe. Basically, we put the EU AI Act, the Digital Market Act, and the Digital Services Act as the three main pillars of the strategy of the European Commission towards tech. And basically, it comes by it comes into force as we are speaking. But basically, it puts certain company in a position where they have to provide even more compliance, accountability evidence. They define gatekeepers for the Digital Market Act, and they define very large operating companies for the Digital Service Act. But basically, these are companies such as Google, Meta, Amazon, that by the product that they propose and by the length and the scale of the product they propose, that they touch so many people that basically they have to provide additional compliance evidence. So I will go very quickly on these ones. They will be in the slides. I don't know, Ramzi, if you share the slides afterwards, but there is some information.
Yep.
For the Digital Service Act, it's more let's say on online platform offering services, and it's more targeted at misinformation or fake news hoaxes, manipulation of information, harm or targeting of certain vulnerable groups. So and they put the responsibility on what they call the very large online platforms or the very large online search engines, and basically that's how they put an additional layer of responsibility on them. And then last but not least, finishing onto the European Union, we have other regulations and what I call impactful entities that applies to AI already nowadays. We have GDPR, of course, and we have the Data Protection Authority. Here I quoted the CNIL, but we have also La Garante in Italy. We have also the Spanish Data Protection Authority. We have the multiple in Germany also. We have certain local data protection authority that already gave decision on artificial intelligence that are taking some initiatives. We have future legislation coming. We have notably the AI liability directive that they are at the very beginning, these two texts, and the product liability directive. Basically, the AI liability directive, it's about the basically fault-based liability for damages caused by AI system, meaning that if there's a problem that has been produced because of the use of an AI, then the AI provider will be fined. That's the idea of this directive. And it will also clarify the burden of proof of the chain of responsibility and accountability between the users, the providers, and the end user. And then the product liability is for even more legislation, and it's more towards product, let's say hardware, but that have embarked AI onto them, and that include also compensating maybe the end user or the consumers, maybe also compensating business that use AI and that may have some losses due to like malfunction of the artificial intelligence systems, such as, for example, data corruption, etc. So that's for the future upcoming legislation. These two are directives, so it means that they will have to be translated into national legislation. So we'll have to have a national legislation that will cover this directive. And then I still put it, although it's not legislation, but it's important to say that multiple countries in Europe have, let's say, published their political agenda or their national strategy regarding AI. And I quote France, Germany, Italy, and Netherlands. And sometimes it goes even against what is being said in the EU AI Act. Typically, France, for example, in its agenda, although there has been some declaration and some attempts at national legislation, there is some attempts to put, for example, the surveillance, so the use of AI into CCTV, into real-time cameras. That is problematic because that's actually going against what I replied earlier. Does it relate to China? It's actually France following the footstep of China in that case. The in-between solution that is now, let's say, politically being presented is that they do not use it immediately with the footage, the real-time footage, but they use the recording and apply AI later. It is mentioned, especially for the Olympic Games, so that's why it comes up. And I think it's important to see that, despite the fact that we'll have the EU AI Act, there will still be some, let's say, local national agenda that might contravene the changes that are being brought by the EU AI Act. Okay. That might also come from the fact that I'm French and I like to criticize my own country, but that's I think for valid for everyone.
Yep, that's true.
So now we will switch to the US. We spent quite some time onto the European approach. Usually, I spend more time on the US part. So the US is quite complex, and I will try to be very clear in my explanation. We have a federal level and a state level. I think most of you know that. And at the federal level, we have multiple layers. And at the state level, we have also multiple layers. What happens is that, focusing first on the federal level, so top, the Biden administration, etc. We have first what we call the SAFE framework that has been presented by the Congress, by the Democrats at the Congress. We have a blueprint for an AI Bill of Rights, which is more guidelines for the artificial intelligence and the development of artificial intelligence. We have an AI executive order, which is in line with the blueprint, which is taking some elements from the SAFE framework that has been published in December or November 2023. We have the NIST AI Risk Management Framework. So NIST, for just a reminder, I mean, I think you know all what NIST is, but it's the National Institute of Standards and Technology, and it's basically an agency of the US government that is publishing, it's a risk management framework. And we have also opinions or statements that have been done by the federal agencies, such as the Federal Trade Commission, for example. I hope it's more or less clear, at least for now. Let's dive into a bit each of these elements. So the SAFE framework actually stands for Security, Accountability, Foundation, Explain. I think they didn't have any idea for what was the last one. And actually they added a fifth one, which is called Innovation, but I think safety didn't sound safe enough. So they just decided to leave it on the side. Basically, what did happens is that a Democrat senator, Chuck Schumer, basically presented that to the Congress, saying, well, we need to come up with some solutions for artificial intelligence. That was before the executive order of President Biden. And it had two main proposals, which is labeling content that has been produced by an AI to distinguish it from human work, and to propose a regulation, so a federal regulation of the foundation models. As I indicate here, honestly, it was mainly to prepare a political agenda, to also scan a bit what was the opinion of the public, preparing for the executive order. And on the other proposal, there has actually no report of any progress whatsoever. It's been almost a year now, and there has been, usually we always have let's say committees that have been created, but here we didn't have much progress. Now we jump into the second one, which is the blueprint. So the blueprint is basically a set of guidelines to actually simply indicate to AI producers or providers what they should do or implement, what kind of rules, but it's not mandatory. So it's really based on the self-application of these measures. It has 5 pillars, safe and effective systems. So the idea is to protect the user against unsafe results, an adherence of standard as well, and also ongoing monitoring of the system itself. Protection on algorithmic discrimination, which is a very big problem in the US. And you can see that it's also having an impact on how the AI models are being developed in the US compared to Europe. For example, that's why in the results of the benchmark, for example, of OpenAI, we have this impression that, for example, the foundation model is getting, let's say, less relevant or more stupid in executing certain tasks. It's because we implement directly this correction of bias into the model themselves. Whereas in Europe, at least for certain companies, the stance that has been taken is that we create models and we put the responsibility onto the people that are developing the model, that are using this foundation model, to also correct the bias that might arise. So we put it one step further in terms of responsibility and accountability, which also leaves then more freedom and for the foundation model to perform well into the benchmarks. We have data privacy as a third pillar, always, so built-in protection and control of the users of the data. Notice and explanation, so this right of information. And then always the possibility to have a human alternatives and fallbacks. The idea is especially for automated decision making in employment, for example. The idea is to propose an opt-out of the automated decision, so that way users can have a conversation with a human. The third one, so we had the SAFE, we had the blueprint. The third one is a relatively recent one. It's the White House executive order. It's in November 2023, published by the Biden administration, that gives a directs actually the federal agencies to develop guidance on AI. So in the US, they decided not to take legislation at the federal level, often because that's not how the model works in the US. It's really more decentralized. But we have sector-specific agencies that will take over AI into their own domain, into their own sector. That's what the European Commission attempted, and that's what the central bank said. No, we're not going to do that. We tried to do this, but the central bank refused, and we end up creating additional boards. What does it bring? Well, basically three main developments. There will be requirements for AI companies to report on their developments or their intention to develop foundation models, so the new ones. So not only for the foundation models providers such as OpenAI, but also for companies that wants to create an AI product. They will need to report, hey, we have this intention of building this AI to the supervisory authority. As for what would be the consequence, would it expect an approval or simply it's an information? There is no further indication onto that. It will probably be decided by the supervisory authority, so Federal Trade Commission, for example. We have a creation of new set of standards, not in the executive order, but basically the decision taken. We will create new standards, including labeling AI generated content and ensuring the safety and security of critical infrastructure. So we find what we had in the blueprint and we find what we had in the SAFE framework. And then there is also the creation of a cybersecurity program that will develop AI tools to find and fix vulnerabilities in critical software. This is, let's say, not related to the AI development as such, but more as the direction the government is taking towards AI. So you can see that these texts already, let's say, relies on the two previous one. And what's the value? What's the legal value of an executive order? So, well, basically it has a force of law, which means that it can be invoked in front of a court, but it is not a legislation. So it's not a law per se, but it has the force of a law. I know, well, these are, let's say, lawyers' peculiarities, but this is quite important, which means that basically it can be used in a court or it can be used as a basis for a judge, but it's not a law per se. So it means that it can potentially be overruled by a certain judge, and probably it will go up to the Supreme Court if it's the case. If we go further, so we go federal level to our fourth block, we have the NIST
Can
AI.
I interrupt you for a second before we go that framework? We have a couple of questions.
I thought so, so that's why I waited a bit.
Yeah, but I wanted to give you your time to finish. We have a couple of very good questions. One of them is about the scope of protection. You know, in GDPR, for example, to compare, any data processing that happens in the EU is kind of governed by GDPR, regardless of the owner of the data. So if I'm if I'm an EU citizen or not, it doesn't matter. But most of the privacy US acts are related to only protection of US citizens.
Yes.
So also from an AI perspective, is it the same case or is it different?
Yeah, so it's exactly the same case. So what they do is that if you are targeting US citizen, what they did is that they adopted the same model as GDPR. So they basically impose their own legislation if you are an international company that wants to do business in the US. The protection that they grant is to US citizens only. Whereas, for example, where GDPR is that if you were a European resident, where it's very different because, say, for example, you are Egyptian but live in Europe, then you are protected because you're an EU resident and you benefit from the GDPR. Whereas if you were Egyptian living in the US, you would not have this protection. So that's for the main difference. As for the legislation that we have seen so far, most of them, for this part, for the federal level, most of them apply to businesses directly. They say to business, you need to take into account the rights, the individual rights of people and the privacy, etc. But they apply to businesses directly. So they give, so it's a slightly different.
Yep,
I hope
excellent.
it answers the questions.
It does, and I think, please correct me if I'm wrong, I think we're at the moment where it's not also very clear how it will end. So I guess after your presentation with the US, we'll go some other geography, and then maybe we can gather together what will happen. So please proceed.
Okay. Shall we then? Okay, that was the only question.
We had others, but I'm looking at the time.
Okay,
we only have like 5-6 minutes, 10 minutes maximum. So yeah, we have to move forward.
I'll move a bit quicker. So we have the NIST AI Risk Management Framework. Here, I will assume, because we are at the gathering of ISACA, that most of you know the way it works. So we have the National Institute of Standards and Technology. That is basically a part of the US Department of Commerce. They developed a framework where they want to aim at the AI risks and the trustworthiness of artificial intelligence. And the idea is to really offer a set of controls or a set of measures that you can implement to address artificial intelligence. I will, let's say, go faster on this part to go quickly to the local legislation in the US, because I think it's quite important. But before that, we have the supervisory authority. So what I meant, what I said earlier is that basically in the US, they say, okay, the government, we don't take a federal legislation or regulation. We leave the supervisory authority the possibility to take ownership of AI into their sector. So we had the FTC, Federal Trade Commission, which is the most powerful agency in the US, that just immediately took over and said, okay, we are installing an Office of Technology. So they did that in 2023. And they took a directive that will be applicable for 10 years, where they say that they can start civil investigating demands on AI, which is basically if they receive a complaint, they can immediately investigate companies on the basis on this complaint. Then we had a joint statement of multiple agencies. So we have Department of Justice, the FTC again, the CFPB, Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, and the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, who all decided to also take a stance on saying that in their respective sectors they will track the use of AI and the discrimination that can result from the use of AI. And they focused on agreeing to collaboratively set rules for the usage of data, so training data and the data sets, for the transparency of the models, and for how to design and use artificial intelligence in their sector. And then we have the SEC for the finance part, and the Human Health and Human Services from the US Department of Health that also issued some rules of AI in healthcare. Local level, so we go one step down. We are in Colorado, California, etc. We have basically also two layers or two different blocks. We have sector-specific legislation, and we have comprehensive state law. So what we call by sector-specific is basically a set of local rules that have been taken for very specific element. If I take the example of employment, so we have New York City local law 144 that was published in 2023, which basically regulates the bias in automated employment decision made by the city itself to evaluate the candidates, etc. And what they need to do is basically any agency of the city that use automated employment decision tools needs to have independent audits and report it to the city itself and have it available for the public. We have the same, for example, with the Illinois Intelligence Video Interview Act, which is on the same topic. We have the Colorado Senate bill that is also on discrimination and prohibiting discrimination through the use of algorithm. So that's for the sector specific. For the comprehensive state law, we have the, for example, California Artificial Intelligence Accountability Act, or the Colorado Artificial Intelligence Act, which are basically two regulations, that's, let's say, the two main examples, that treats with AI not only to just employment or intellectual property or privacy, but really general, and that gives rights to users. And there we come to more to the question that was asked earlier, to giving rights and tools to the users, to the end users, so not really for the business, but more for the citizens, onto what can they do if there is an artificial intelligence being used, what do they have access to, and that's, for example, the right to access their data, to know what kind of model are being used, etc., etc. So that's very complex in the US. At least I find it quite complex the way they work, and I like to spend a bit more time on it. Basically, their focus is slightly different. In the US, they are really concerned about discrimination, which, in my opinion, is reflecting the societal situation in the US. So that's basically artificial intelligence only amplifies the bias that we have in our society. So that's why in the US they are making so much effort into that. Whereas, for example, in Europe, we are really focusing on privacy, on the processing of data and making sure that the data is correct and that we have a right to use this data, and then that, for example, if we process health data, that we perform the risk assessments, etc., that we foresee everything. So that's for the United States. Do you want to take one question, Ramzi, now, or can I go directly to the Chinese?
No, I think we will have to go directly. Unfortunately,
Yes.
we don't have enough time.
Okay, no problem. So now let's go to the other side of the globe, at least from our Planisphere perspective. So in China, the approach is completely different. So the focus in China is really a different concept of privacy. So it even comes to the fundamental concept of privacy, where basically the individual rights is seen more as an individualism, as, let's say, egoism, or being selfish. And what is more important is the public order, making sure that everyone can live together properly and that everyone respects each other, and that basically the government that is overseeing this entire public life has the tools, the correct tools, for making sure that everyone can live in harmony. That's the concept of the let's say of privacy there. So basically we have to intervene a bit more. So in China, they have they were the first one to legislate on artificial intelligence as early as 2017. And what they do is that they do small iterations. So every year they have new provisions, new amendments onto their artificial law, and they really focus on new concept and they really adapt to the technology. To that, I personally think that as a lawyer, we should maybe have less big texts and more iterative way of providing legislation, because they adapt much more quickly to the evolution of the technology. So on that, I have to say that it is a quite interesting approach. So what is the deep synthesis provision? It's basically differentiating the companies that provide AI services and the ones that provide and providing the technical support for it, and the one that use these services, these AI services. And it sets basically 4 pillars, very identical to for example, the Bill of Rights, the AI Bill of Rights. data security and personal data protection. So basically, the Chinese GDPR applies. So the Chinese privacy law. They establish also a requirement for a management system. The same, for example, you would have an ISMS or a risk management system, but for algorithm review, where you need to list every kind of artificial intelligence is being used into your company, what is being used, what are the users of it, and you need to have extra measures onto children. We have a requirement of transparency, so you need to share this information with your users. We have labeling of information. So here we find also what was mentioned in the US. And we have also a responsibility onto technical security. But what's more important is the accountability that we have in China regarding the usage of artificial intelligence. And they developed a set of measures, and typically to reply to the needs or to the fake news problem, is that the users of AI services are responsible for the for what they are creating with the AI service, alongside with the AI provider, which means that basically, if you have a generative AI that will create certain types of information that might be false or that might be considered false by the Chinese government, then what will happen is that the AI provider will be held accountable, but also the users that led to the generation of this data. So that really creates this whole accountability in the whole supply chain up to the end user, the whole supply chain of artificial intelligence. They also have a local legislation level in Shenzhen or in Shanghai, for example, which are two poles that are very innovative, where basically they just set their own set of rules for the companies that are innovating in their own sphere. And that's also where we can find also this information about measures taken about intellectual property, but also for the fake information generation. So I didn't spend as much time on the Chinese case, unfortunately, also due to the time. Ramzi, I don't know if you would like to take a couple of questions by the end of the presentation. Before that, I just want to have one quick overview of everything. What is the impact of these three models, regardless which one it is that we have a huge burden in terms of administration that is coming up, whatever model we use. So risk assessment, impact assessment, making sure that we respect the rights of individuals, etc. And we have a lot of upcoming risk or new kind of risks that will come into the scope of all the company, amplifying existing one and creating new one. So that's it for, let's say, the overview of the legislation, at least for the three main models that are evolving. And I'm actually very curious if we have the time to do this poll, Ramzi. I would be very curious to see maybe first what are the biggest risks for you in AI, and after that, I think we have a third poll and last poll about the regulatory model that may prevail.
Yep. I asked everyone if we can extend another 10 minutes, so I think we still have around 2-3 minutes to go. Everyone, please, if you don't mind, vote with us. What do you see as the biggest risk for AI? Which shows, let's say, 4 of them and then others, because as you can see from the slide, there is a lot of risks. Responses are coming in. While the responses are coming in, we have a quick question. Basically, one second, I have to get back to it. So, is there any requirements from the auditors, whether in the Digital Markets Act, in the AI Act, to be, for example, CISA certified or Dutch RE certified? Like, is there any emphasis on the individual doing the audit on any of these acts?
So what, for example, the EU AI Act is mentioned that they are mentioning that most of the time it has to be a skilled professional, but they rarely go further. And usually the certification process comes 2-3 years after the legislation came into force. So, but you have to prove a certain expertise, of course, for the validity of the audit. What I see is that we will rely on existing IT auditors as very often, and we will probably have some modules as well. ISACA is already providing some, and I think that we will probably rely on these expertise or these courses and token of expertise that can be used. But for now, no specific, at least none that comes to my mind, apart from this one from the EU AI Act.
Okay, we also have, where is it? Just a second. Yeah. How difficult is it for companies to define clear guidelines for developers based on risk categories? I think this is very relevant now because we will get the audience. Well, the voting is almost 64 responses. We have 39% algorithmic bias, 15% unclear legal regulation, 35% loss of control in the decision-making process. Fines for non-compliance is 1% and 7% others. So it looks to me like the winner is algorithmic bias, followed by the loss of control in decision-making, and then comes the unclear legal regulation. And yeah, the fines for non-compliance, I guess, also covered in the unclear legal regulation. So how difficult it is to define the guidelines for the developers?
Well, if the question is how difficult it is difficult.
Yeah.
As for what I think the underlying question is, like, where can we go to, let's say, have guidelines, or what could we put in place to have this guideline for at least preventing, for example, this algorithmic bias? The first and foremost is actually in link with, for example, corporate social responsibility, where you have to know first the impact of your tool. And that's why actually impact assessments sometimes are, let's say, a bit neglected. But what do you want to achieve, and try to think about what are the bias upfront. And then, so that's the first thing, performing an impact assessment, know for what will be used your model. And the second one is in the team that is preparing the data sets, making sure also that you have a diversity into the team, in diversity in terms of course, well, ethnical backgrounds, etc. But it's not always possible. But in terms of also of diversity, in terms of exchanging the information. So trying to have the most complete data set is actually key, because this is determining also after that. And the way you train the model that's why it can be important to, for example, rely on some parts that can be open source when you are training the model, and have often smaller release, where you will just test certain functionalities of your model. That helps, at least for this part. That's what I would advise. But as for the guidelines, yeah, you have the Lovelace Turing ethical code, which is a very interesting piece of paper. It doesn't have any, let's say, great value legally speaking, but it's always a good way to get developers involved. So it's an oath, actually, that the idea is to, because developers are getting more and more involved in everyday life, and they have such an impact in what they're doing, that the idea would be to have an oath the same way that doctors or lawyers are taking. And this would be an oath for developers and IT professional. So the Turing oath, I think now it's called the Lovelace Turing oath. So this is a way to get involved. Yeah.
So more of an ethical code, let's put it that way, because it's
an ethical code.
It's an ethical code. I also launched our last, I wouldn't say last, because we have the final one for evaluating the event, but which model do you think will prevail? We up to now have 39 responses. So please, if anyone did not vote yet, go ahead and vote for which model do you think prevailed: Europe, USA, China, or not sure/mix. We're very interested to know your opinion.
If I can, while people are voting, I
Yeah.
see a very interesting comment that that the quality of the data was less important. That is true. So basically, the more data you have, it is, but it's the cleanliness of the data and the variety of the sources of the data. So where the data comes from, that is important. So not the quality of the data that you have, but the diversity of the data that is very important. Because say, for example, that you train your data only on European-based data sets, you will have a European-centered model, depending on what you will want to do, and you won't be global. Let's put it that way.
Yep, I think up to now we have only 51 responses, but we also lost some of the audience due to the timing. But we do have Europe prevailing with 63%, Not Sure / Mix with 31% coming in the second place, and 4% USA and 2% China. But I want to comment on something that you said. It looks like China took the agile approach when they create the law, right? Like, let's try a minimal viable law, if that's a term that I just coined, and then they added on it in sprints.
Yeah.
So yeah, and I want to know what would be your last words, because I think we will need to close. We're already 15 minutes past 8. What would you like to share with us at the end of this presentation?
Well, first of all, I see that there are still 100 participants. So I want to thank everyone for attending. It's I really appreciate. I hope that that I shared some knowledge with you and you learned maybe a couple of things today. And I also would like to thank Isaka for the opportunity of sharing this knowledge. I always like to share what I learned. So I can. I'm very grateful. I see. Can I bring Jean for my CIPPE exam? So that made me laugh.
Yeah. We also launched a poll for the quality, and I can tell you, like, 71% say this is very beneficial, and 29% is saying beneficial, and the voting is coming in. So thank you so much, Jan, and really we enjoyed this very, very informative webinar. And I think maybe as the regulations mature enough around the world, we should have a second phase of this webinar, if you agree, of course.
Yeah.
Thank you, everyone, for attending tonight, and hopefully we see you next on the next Square Table. Thanks a lot, and have a good evening.
Thank you. Good evening.